Hello, my name's David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Curiosity Invited. My name's David Bryan, and today I have the great pleasure once again of speaking to an old friend, Michael Lawson Jr. He is a healthcare professional, mental health professional,
Yes.
Former teacher,
Yes.
as I recall,
Former
an entrepreneur,
yes,
and he is, among many other things, he is the CEO? I don't know what you are, of the Cannabis Media Collective.
Yes, CEO, founder, president, secretary, custodian,
Everything, yeah,
janitor.
It's just you. It's everything,
me.
Yeah. Okay, so. Cannabis, well, I have so many questions about that. Cannabis Media Collective.
Yeah, let's get into it.
This is not, you tell me if I'm wrong about this. This is not, hey, this is a secret way of trying to, make it okay for people to get blasted. This is, and it's not a way to circumvent the laws of Georgia, which is where Michael is. Michael is in Atlanta.
Yes.
Nor is it a way for me to have a conversation about pot, even though I live in the state of Wyoming, in which it is also not, marijuana is not legal for medicinal purposes, recreational purposes, anything else.
Yes.
So what it is, and I will let you do that. So anyway, thank you, Michael. Thanks for being here. And, we're going to talk about this, and we'll see if we'll talk about something else. But especially because I know when we did this last time, that was the one thing we didn't talk much about.
Right.
So,
we talked about
tell
everything.
me, what is Cannabis Media Collective?
Absolutely.
And why'd you start it?
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. We go back, long time now.
Yes, we do.
1997. Cannabis Media Collective. Cannabis Media Collective is a digital platform that is all about elevating cannabis wellness, right? I educate consumers on how to use the plant in what I philosophize in the best way. And I educate entrepreneurs, manufacturers, producers about the culture of cannabis, their consumers. There's so much education gaps on so many different levels in cannabis. And so my platform is just all about elevating the science of cannabis wellness to be understood as true science and educating citizens and empowering entrepreneurs. That's like my tagline. And so I started Cannabis Media Collective out of an understanding that there was a strong desire for consumers to have access to legitimate scientific information and data that could support their well-being. And
so the initial thrust of this was well-being, health, mental health, physical health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And really the genesis of this, I finished my master's in clinical mental health counseling in 2014 here at Mercer University.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, over the years, I haven't been comfortable talking about it, but now I'm evolving in my space. So at that time, I was growing cannabis in my basement, just as a personal passion and hobby. I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't share that with anybody. It was clandestine. I mean, even now in Georgia, it's still illegal. But by the time I entered into graduate school, I had already developed this deep passion for the plant and understanding of its medical benefits and therapeutic benefits, particularly towards mental health. And at the time, we're talking when I started that program is 2012, you would get laughed out of the room in mental health professional circles talking about cannabis and mental health and how it could benefit us and support our well-being.
And was that true just in Georgia, or was that widespread nationally?
I think in states where medical cannabis had already been established for a significant period of time, I think the conversation was more well received. But I would argue that back then, especially because this is like pre-Colorado legalization era, we're talking 2011, 12. Yeah, it was very taboo to talk about cannabis and mental health and post-traumatic stress and anxiety and all of these different things. Where now
Hmm.
it's out in the mainstream media, people are talking about it.
Hmm.
Because even back then, people in the cannabis community, we knew that we were finding relief for post-traumatic stress, anxiety, you name a myriad of mental health challenges. Anecdotally, in the cannabis community, we knew we were getting relief and positive results from that. We knew that, but there was really no scientific data to back that up. There were no studies done by official organizations or universities or schools.
Hmm.
Um, there was no framework for how do you use this plant to uh, mitigate your anxiety, your post traumatic stress, or whatever your issue might be, or if it's a physical issue, your gut symptoms, or chronic pain. Because my whole philosophy is that we use this plant for one of three reasons: a physiological reason, meaning chronic pain, inflammation, um, any number of different benefits of the physiological side, or on the psychological side for the reduction of anxiety and post traumatic stress. I always circle back to that because I struggle with post traumatic stress, and like many Americans do nowadays. Or it's a combination of both, where people are using this plant to deal with mental health challenges and physical challenges. Um, and my whole philosophy is that the high that has been so taboo over all these years is really just a side effect of all these other wonderful things that this plant is doing to our body. And even more so, the science is showing us now that THC, which has always been the villain, THC is proven to be more effective in a lot of different ways than even CBD. And so years ago, when Dr. Sanjay Gupta came out in CNN, which was really great, and he did his whole cannabis discovery journey, it was great, but it was a double-edged sword because on one hand, he exposed the medical value of cannabis, but he also threw THC in this recreational box. Like THC is for recreation and CBD is for medicine.
Right.
When come to find out, no, the whole plant is medicine.
Right. In
Um,
fact, tell me if this is wrong. I read somewhere that you can't even get the benefits of CBD unless there's some THC in what you ingest. Is that true?
that's an argument.
Yeah.
There are two different arguments, right? That some people use these cannabinoids, or what you're referring to, the CBD, CBN, CBG. There are thousands of cannabinoids being
Mm.
discovered all the time, but the most popular ones, yes, there are some doctors, practitioners, consumers who use these products in what they call isolate form, right? So it's just CBD by itself, right? You can use it,
Yes.
you can drop some in your water, or you can use
Right.
some as a topical cream or what have you. Um, but there's also this whole plant paradigm where, and research has shown that THC works in concert with CBD and all these other cannabinoids and the terpenes and the flavonoids. And we don't have to get into a deep science conversation about that. But basically, all the compounds of the cannabis plant are working together in concert, which we call the entourage effect, right? And so, yes, to your point, there's strong evidence that CBD is more effective when used with THC, and that's really where the science is going. It's showing us that THC, come to find out, used in low doses, is very effective for many different things.
Used in low doses. So say something about that. What
Yeah,
used
so
first? Used how? And what counts as a low dose?
very good question, right? So it's so funny. You come from the era of like the pot era, right?
I
Where
do.
it's like you roll some grass in a joint, you smoke it, and you go about your life, right?
That was that
Well,
was that was my that was my experience in college, and actually, and after a very short period, after a very short honeymoon, whenever I did, whenever I did take a hit of pot,
yeah,
I got more anxiety if I was in pain, and the pain intensified,
you know,
and I could barely finish a sentence. So
man, you know what's so interesting, David, and I can spend. Sorry, I'm adjusting my volume over here.
no, that's good. That's much better.
Um, what's very interesting. I follow a guy, a good friend of mine I met in Missouri last year called Doctor Sulak. Dr. Dustin Sulak. He's out of Maine. His platform is called healer.com. And he does these webinars once a month. Matter of fact, I'll send you the link. I think you'd be
Great.
very interested.
That's great.
He does these webinars, free webinars once a month. Just sign up via Zoom, and he just does a presentation on various different topics in medical cannabis. And his last presentation was on cannabis and dementia and Alzheimer's and just the elderly geriatric community.
Yeah.
And but one thing he always preaches is that what's so fascinating about the plant is when used in the wrong dose, it can have the opposite effect to exactly what you described, to where it can enhance your pain, right? To where it can make you more anxious. We all know
It was the only thing I could focus on was
right.
how
We all know about the anxiety and paranoia, right? And so
yeah.
this plant is fascinating to where you can use it at a particular dose, and there's no such thing as a right dose because everybody's body is different, right? Everybody has what we call an endocannabinoid system. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Are you familiar with the
No.
ECS?
No.
Right. So just like your nervous system, your respiratory system, the human body has an endocannabinoid system, ENDO cannabinoid system.
Mm-hmm.
And this system regulates our memory, pain, um, immunity, energy, appetite, all of these things that really revolve around our quality of life.
And
Was scratching your head.
I am, because is this a recent discovery, or is this
Right.
system been known for a long time?
Excellent question. So they discovered the endocannabinoid system, I want to say, in the 50s and 60s.
Really?
But they do not talk about it in medical school.
Never heard of
They
it.
don't talk, and that's why another reason why Cannabis Media Collective came to be, because you have doctors and medical practitioners out here in the world who are not familiar with this science, right? And so basically, every mammal has an endocannabinoid system. Every single mammal on this planet. And so every mammal, it's a lock and key system essentially, where our brains have receptors, and we have receptors throughout our body,
Sure.
but particularly in the brain. Our brains are designed to receive these cannabinoids from the cannabis plant. It's like a lock and key system. So your brain is designed to receive CBD, THC, all of these compounds from the plant. That's just science. That's just the way it is. And so the endocannabinoid system, as I've said, it regulates all these different aspects of our life that have a critical impact on our quality of life, right? And so, for instance, some new research that actually just is emerging regarding cannabis and autism. There's a wonderful doctor, Dr. Bonnie
Really?
Gold. Yes, Dr. Bonnie Goldstein. She's actually good friends with Dr. Sulak. She and her team have pretty much discovered, and she did a presentation on it, so I apologize if I'm misspeaking in terms of her discovering this, but research is emerging that shows that children with autism have an endocannabinoid deficiency, right? And so let me back up. In the endocannabinoid system, the human brain and human body is designed to receive cannabinoids, but it also produces its own cannabinoids on its own. One being anandamide, which is
you mean the nervous system, the organism, the mammalian organism produces this thing.
Every mammal's endocannabinoid system produces its own endocannabinoids. So, for instance, if you get up and go outside in Wyoming and you go run, you go exercise, and you feel that adrenaline, you feel that runner's high, as they call it. That's from anandamide, right? It's called the abbreviation is 2AG. The human body produces this on its own, right? So it's that positive vibe you get when you're exercising. It's that feedback you get when you're in flow doing something that you really enjoy, right? The human body produces this on its own. Children with autism have a deficiency in this across the board. They also have issues with their gut, right?
Yeah.
And the endocannabinoid system has a lot to do with your gut and what's going on in your gut. A lot of people don't know 90% of the serotonin receptors are in our gut.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no coincidence that we feel better and when we eat healthier and our lifestyle that revolves around good nutrition, we have good outcomes, right? Point of the story, the endocannabinoid system is not very well discussed. And well, it's emerging now. in mainstream science.
Yeah, I mean, I just Googled it, and it's a real deal here.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, you can take a major dive into it, right? And then people can also go to my platform, cannabismediacollective.com. I have a lot of great interviews with doctors and professionals who take a deeper dive on this, right? And so basically the human body, like all mammals, is designed to receive this plant, right? We're supposed to be using this plant.
Well, but let me ask you. So if the human body, or any other mammalian body, but if the human body produces it on its own, why do people need
Well, the human body,
that?
produces certain cannabinoids on its own, not the whole list that we find is in the cannabis plant, right? So it's only a couple.
Okay, but why do people need other cannabinoids that the body doesn't produce?
That's a great question, and my answer to that would be to bring balance and homeostasis, right? And to your point, or to your question rather, not everybody needs cannabis, right? That's not my philosophy. I don't think that cannabis, I always say cannabis is not for everyone, but it's an option for everyone, right? Some people find balance, some people find homeostasis, some people find peace without using this plant.
Sure.
That's perfectly fine, right? But many people who have deficiencies in any number of categories, whether it be physical or psychological, they find this plant benefits them in many ways. And I want to circle back to what you were talking about, the anxiety piece, right?
Yeah.
And low doses of THC. What's a low dose?
What's a low dose? Was that question?
Right.
We went down the wormhole after what's a low dose.
We went down the wormhole, so I'm gonna land the
Here we
plane
go.
in a second. And so what we have to realize is that for one, cannabis science has come such a long way, right? Like I said, when we started, we were talking about your era, man, roll some grass, right? And so basically, a lot of people are not aware and familiar with the fact that cannabis science has made leaps and bounds, right?
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I have a product right here on my desk. My good friend, Dr. Rashawn Hodge, he makes this daytime focus CBD, CBG formulation. And so what people are doing now is serendipitous. Is sitting right here.
And cannabinoids are completely legal in the state of Georgia.
Absolutely. This is a fully legal product. This is a hemp extract. And so hemp is legal in Georgia. And hemp and cannabis are pretty much the same, but hemp is typically very, very low THC content.
Right.
And just for the listeners and viewers out there in Georgia and a lot of these southern states, hemp or cannabis that is 0.3 THC or less is legal. And so basically what we're seeing now is cats like Dr. Hodge have now powderized the cannabinoids. So they've taken CBD, CBG, they turned it into a powder, they've pressed it into a tablet. So now we don't have to smoke the plant to receive its benefits. We can use tablets. And I kind of jumped forward in terms of powderizing the cannabinoids, but it was like this evolution that took place where it was all about the flower, right? And then extraction processes were developed, where now they extract the cannabinoids from the flower and they turn those into oils. That's what you see a lot of the kids smoking vape pens, right? And we won't get deep into the science of distillate and all that, but they extract the compounds from the plant, turn it into an oil. But now we are learning that at the end of the day, one of the most effective ways to take medicine is via the tablet form, which is why Big Pharma is in the tablet industry, right? Because tablets dissolve better in the gut. And so, there's a huge gummy market and a lot of people are into gummies and all of that, but scientifically, the gummies don't work as effective in the gut, and they also have a lot of sugar.
I was about to say they're just usually saturated with sugar.
Absolutely. And so circling back to the dose, now we have a way where we can 25 milligrams hemp extract, and then also these are terpenes, pinene, limonene, myrcene. Terpenes are the compounds that give the plants their aroma, right? So the coffee bean, you smell that coffee bean, that's a terpene you're smelling, right? You smell that lavender plant, that's a terpene you're smelling. I think that's linalool, I think is the terpene behind lavender. When you are peeling that lemon and you smell that lemon zest, that's limonene,
Mm.
right? And these terpenes, come to find out, also have medical therapeutic purposes. Like limonene, for instance, I have a great interview with Dr. Hodge, who has this product. He explains where limonene is an antiviral compound. So it's not a coincidence that Clorox and all these cleaning agents have the lemon scent,
Mm.
right? It's not just for kicks. And so as time goes on, literally every week, every month, every year, we're discovering new applications of this plant. Now they're discovering that this plant, when used in certain formulations, can shrink or kill tumor cells,
Mm.
right? So it's a cancer killer. I just mentioned, I mentioned autism, but I didn't get into the benefits of cannabis.
Well,
So
but before we even go there, I was circle back to, so I just want to finish that thought, so it's not just,
yeah,
you know, the posted notes not just sticking out of my brain.
right.
When you said the right dose, a low dose, what'd you say?
Yeah, we talk
Microdose.
right,
Yeah.
microdose.
What
Right.
what
So
what does that
when
mean?
right,
Like,
when we talk about dosing, right?
yeah,
Everybody's the matter of fact, the conversation I was getting into before that was about the endocannabinoid system.
correct.
Every individual person endocannabinoid system is different.
Right.
So there is no right dose when it comes to cannabis, because your dose that works for you might not be the one that works for me. So unfortunately, people have to kind of experiment and play around and figure out what works for them.
Mm-hmm.
But the beauty of this plant is that you can experiment with it safely in a way that's more than likely not going to harm you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, but to answer your question in terms of dose, that's a very good question. So let's talk flower, right? I'm a flower person. I still like to smoke the flower. And there's always this debate, well, you can't really dose. How do I know? Well, you can dose the flower by putting the flower on a scale, right? And so what I do is, I'm a cannabis nerd. I know for my personal consumption, I know exactly what amount of a particular strain I put on the scale is going to give me a desired effect. So for instance, I'm actually on a typical day, I might smoke zero point 0.4 on the scale. I'll roll a joint and I'll smoke the whole 0.4. I'll be alert, I'll be sharp, but I'll be in a great mood. I'll be uplifted. I'll feel creative. I won't feel stressed out. I won't be thinking of, and I won't have intrusive thoughts from post-traumatic stress that might just, negative intrusive thoughts or flashbacks or things that might just disturb me throughout the day. I won't experience that, for that period of time. And so I like the flower particularly because the onset is quick. When you smoke the flower, it hits your lungs, smoke goes through the capillaries of your lungs, goes to your brain, and it's almost instant. But it doesn't last all day, right?
Mm-hmm.
It only lasts a couple hours. So you don't have to deal with the effects, for a prolonged period of time. And so zero point 0.4 is my daytime dose if I'm working, right? If I'm moving about and I'm kind of being social, then I might roll 0.8, right? And that will still put me in a situation where I'll be alert.
And what point eight and
Point
point
eight
four
of point
grams?
eight of a gram.
I got it.
Right. And so that, that's my flower dose. When I'm ready to go to sleep, I'll roll a whole gram. Right. And so when you talk about doses, that's how I dose my flower. But now that the cannabinoids are being powderized and extracted, now we can use tablets and actually measure milligrams of a particular cannabinoid that we're using. So to circle back, low dose is, we're talking like 5 milligrams, or less in terms of somebody that's using THC. You know what I mean? And so,
And
question.
so the THC, whereas THC is a cannabinoid, or it is a
Yes.
plant that it
No,
is
THC is a cannabinoid.
is a
Yes.
cannabinoid. Um so THC is a cannabinoid. There are other cannabinoids that can have an effect on people, or do have an effect on people, that
Absolutely.
people can use for a variety of different reasons, that do
Absolutely.
not necessarily have the psychotropic effect.
Absolutely not.
And
THC, from what we know, THC is the only one that gives you that really deep
Right.
psychoactive experience.
So, so is there an argument for, but there are other ways of getting these effects minus the psychoactive effect. Why, why, why should it be legalized? Why put energy, effort into legalizing, what I knew from back in the day, which was pot,
Yeah,
right?
well, because we've been intentionally miseducated on this plant for almost a century, right? So let's circle back in time. In the 1800s, cannabis was part of the pharmacopoeia in the United States or in just North America.
Yeah.
Cannabis was used as a bronchodilator. Cannabis
Right.
expands the lungs and the bronchioles. So people with asthma and asthma attacks, they would prescribe indica syrups for people, right? Cannabis was you could go into a pharmacy in the late 1800s, early 1900s and buy cannabis products. We've known that they've been beneficial to us for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you go back to the Chinese, to the Egyptians, every culture that was deep into science acknowledged cannabis as a medicine, as a therapeutic. So this is old news. We've known this, right? But it wasn't until the 1930s when Harry Anslinger, J. Edgar Hoover, and this whole gang, part of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, this is the precursor to the DEA,
Right.
they came out and they pretty much waged a culture war against cannabis and said the blacks, the Mexicans, the Chinese are using
Yeah.
opium and they're using
Sure.
dope and they're terrorizing the community and they're doing all these
Yeah.
things.
Reefer madness.
Reefer Madness, where Harry Anslinger, J. Edgar Hoover gave Hollywood the resources and the green light to come up with these farcical narratives around
Yeah.
cannabis,
Yeah.
followed by prohibition. And see what happened with cannabis prohibition is Harry Anslinger and the gang had to go on a state-to-state campaign to convince each governor to prohibit cannabis, right? And so when they swept through the Midwest, the Wyomings of the world, the Nebraskas, and they got to the East Coast, they came to New York. And at the time, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia was mayor. This is in late 1930s, 1939. At the time, this is New York, 5 boroughs, speakeasies everywhere. People are smoking pot everywhere, and it's not problematic. The mayor knew this. The mayor knew that cannabis was not an issue, not to mention that there was an economy behind it. And this is where it gets really interesting. So Mayor LaGuardia says, you know what? I'm not trying to hear this. I'm going to put together my own panel to study this and see what they come back with. So the LaGuardia Commission was formed in 1939. They did a 4-year study. It was released in 1944. It was the first comprehensive study of cannabis in the United States, particularly done by, an organized medical organization. The American Medical Association was behind it, the AMA at the time. So this was an official study, and they came with about 13 different findings, all of which we have confirmed today that it's not it doesn't contribute to juvenile delinquency and violence in the community. It's not breaking our communities down. I don't even need to go through the list, but one of the most important conclusions they came to was economically the epicenter in New York at the time. And I agree. I argue that this was happening in every metropolitan city where Black people were. The epicenter of cannabis distribution and sale was Harlem, USA. And so at the time, nationwide, the immigrants and freed slaves from the South and the Mexicans and Latin communities, we controlled the cannabis industry at that time. And cannabis could be grown anywhere. It was growing in the wild, all over the place. And the U.S. government knew this. And so, long story short, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, J. Edgar Hoover, the federal government went on this smear campaign to miseducate the nation on this plant. They were very successful. So fast forward in time, you have the baby boomers of the world, my father and their generation, who up until now have had this understanding that this plant is borderline evil, is dangerous. You get blasted, you get high, and you're not a productive member of society using this plant. God forbid you use it on a daily basis, Right. I have a conversation with my mother about this all the time because she still is in that baby boomer, Harry Anslinger mentality. Like, you smoking weed every day? I'm like, absolutely. But guess what? I'm also up at 5 a.m. exercising. I'm also handling my business as a father. I'm also co-owner of 12 restaurants at LAX, multiple real estate properties in Atlanta, a new company that you see on the wall behind me, a husband. You know, I wear many different hats, many different roles in the course of a day. And I use cannabis to make me a more effective, positive person. And so
Good luck with that conversation, by the
way. Right, with Miss Maddie. And so that's what Cannabis Media Collective is all about. When I say elevating cannabis wellness, it is educating the people to know that, number one, cannabis is an option for you, and you don't have to smoke the flower, because a lot of people are hung up on the stigma behind that. They don't want to smell like weed. They don't want the red eye Jedi and all that. But my platform is all about helping people understand that you can use this plant, you can use it on a consistent basis, and you can use it in a way that benefits your life at the end of the day. So, long story short, we've been lied to. We've been lied to. We've been had. We've been bamboozled, and we've been misled and led astray.
And so two questions. One is about the plant, and the other is about the collective. So is it possible for people to get the benefits of this particular cannabinoid, THC, without THC, or no? If your body thrives, if what your endocannabinoid system needs is THC, there's no other way to get it other than THC. And that's the first piece. And then the second really is about, okay, so what does the Cannabis Media Collection actually do? Like, what's the do? So the first one is the, the THC thing. Why? I mean, I guess what I was asking before is why the struggle, why the uphill struggle against all of this misinformation about THC if there are other non-psychotropic ways of getting the benefits, or are there not?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, and I think there are. I think there are ways to get similar benefits from THC without using THC. And when we talk about benefits, and Dr. Sulak just talked about this in one of his recent webinars, is research is coming out that's showing THC is more effective for inflammation, reducing inflammation, and for pain. So recently, up until now, it's been this whole CBD conversation, CBD. And CBD is legal. There's another thing. CBD is legal everywhere. So there's no coincidence that they're pushing that agenda, because it's an economic incentive too, right? It's legal everywhere. You can sell it everywhere.
Right.
But the data is rolling in that is showing that THC, come to find out, is more effective pain management, more effective with inflammation, more effective with reducing symptoms of depression. However, when used in the wrong dose, wrong time, wrong place, wrong setting, those things are very important. You could get the opposite effect, right? So I'll give you an example. And I'm still going to answer the question in terms of, can these things be solved by other compounds?
Yeah.
They probably can, right? And let's face it, if you're trying to sleep, you can have a cup of chamomile tea.
Sure. Yeah.
Your nighttime herbal tea, and it'll probably put you down. Right. So yeah, there are definitely other ways to get the same outcome that you want, right? You could take an Advil, you could take some all different types of foods that have anti-inflammatory properties, right? But the bottom line is THC works very well.
Right.
Simple as that.
Right.
And people know this, the science is in. And so set and setting, right? You and I can both consume the same cannabis
absolutely
at the same time, in the same manner, and have two different outcomes because we have different endocannabinoid systems, right? Similarly, in terms of your setting, right? Like I tell my clients, and I'm gonna get to what CMC does in a second. I tell my clients all the time, imagine I'm sitting on my couch behind me, lights dim, Miles Davis playing, and I smoke a joint. I'm gonna have more than likely a very relaxing, introspective moment that I'm going to enjoy. Versus if I'm at the bank, in the parking lot, people coming in and out, people moving to and fro, and I'm sitting in my car
fighting for your spot.
And I'm in my car smoking weed.
Yeah.
And people are walking by and like, oh my God, it smells like bud. Oh, it's the middle of the day. This guy's smoking weed. That type of setting more than likely is going to make that consumer more anxious, more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And they're going to have a totally different outcome in experience. Sure. So not only is it the dose of cannabis that we use, but it's also the setting in which we use it. And so fast forward in time, when I founded Cannabis Media Collective, a couple things happened in my life. Number one, while I was doing my master's program, I completely saw that it was abundantly clear to me that cannabis was not welcome in the mental health conversation when I felt that it should be. But I had to stay very quiet. I had to tiptoe around. I'm in Georgia. And at the time, I'm working in the criminal justice system as a therapist in DeKalb County. Shout out to Chief Judge Vincent Crawford. And so I had to I had to tread very lightly. And it was the beginning of my career, so I couldn't just come out like, oh, I'm a stoner / therapist, and I'm helping people figure it out. No, I couldn't do that. But what I found at the time was all of my clients were dealing with post-traumatic stress. I was in the criminal justice system doing mandated therapy. So all my clients were on probation and were basically forced into therapeutic counseling relationship.
Right.
But all my clients had post-traumatic stress. They were either victims of a violent crime, they perpetrated a violent crime, or they witnessed a violent crime. And really, if you're the perpetrator, then it's really all three except for the victim piece. But anyway, and the judges were so confused because they're like, man, why are these kids still smoking weed knowing that when they fail this drug test, they could go to prison? And I had to explain to them over time, of course, that bottom line, these young people are finding relief from cannabis, particularly for sleep, right? A lot of people use cannabis for sleep, particularly people struggling with post-traumatic stress because of the nightmares, the flashbacks, and just sleep disturbances, period. And sleep is like the cornerstone of health.
Absolutely.
Right? If you're not getting good sleep, then you're unhealthy in other ways, more than likely. And then when you talk about people dealing with mental health issues, you go to sleep. You can't go to sleep because you're anxious. Then you don't have a lot of sleep. Then you wake up anxious, and it's just a revolving door and a cycle that repeats itself, right? And so that's number one. I knew that cannabis is an option for people, and it's not really being discussed. Then I had my own physical challenges where I had this major surgery. I had 3 different operations on my sinuses. I forget the names of them, but and I'll never forget, man, my anesthesiologist, a brother, as I'm coming out of the bathroom with my scrubs on, my ass out, I'm really nervous about getting on this table. And he literally leans over and whispers in my ear. He's like, have you heard of CBD? And at that time, I was very familiar with it, but I never used it or tried it. I smoke weed. I'm a THC guy. And so I was like, yeah, no, I've heard of CBD. And he's like, look, you really want to try to get some because it's going to help with your inflammation and your recovery, and just really try to get some of that. This is 2016.
Oh, wow.
This is 2016. At this point, I'm like years into my therapy career, so I'm kind of respected in court. I'm openly having conversations about cannabis and how we need to kind of change the way we evaluate our clients and so on and so forth. But here's the most important thing about that experience. When I have this surgery, literally I was in so much pain the next day. I was like suicidal. I was like I would rather end it now than endure this. Like, why did I do this? This is crazy. And the way my doctor explained it, he was like, look, you'd rather do all 3 at once than have to do 3 operations and come back and all of that. So it was brutal. And so the first thing I'm thinking of is, man, I need to find this doctor this anesthesiologist that mentioned CBD. I need to find out how I can get some, how to use it. Because like I said, I'm a THC guy. So I don't know where to get CBD. I don't know how to dose it. I don't know how to administer it. Do I use a tincture? Do I use an oil? Do I use an edible? I don't know the frequency in which I need to use it. I don't know anything. Man, I reach out to this guy. He's a ghost. Literally, to this day, I haven't heard from this dude.
Really?
I called him. I paged him. I emailed him. Crickets. And luckily for me, I had a mentor I had just met. Shout out to Dr. Uma Donabalin. She's one of the premier medical cannabis spokespersons really in the world. She's out of Boston. So I call her. She's like, oh, I got a guy. She gets me the product. She tells me how to use it. Man, do you know I go into the doctor's office for these recovery sessions and they clean out my sinuses and do the whole evaluation. Shout out to Dr. Dennis, one of the best ENTs in the United States. He's here in Atlanta. Man, I came in there and he's like clamoring, like, nurse, bring the camera. Nurse, bring that other camera. Come here. This recovery is fascinating. I've never seen anything like this. The inflammation is
this is CBD use?
Yes, this is CBD I was using. Just pure CBD.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't want to say pure. No, it wasn't pure CBD. It was extract. So it was full spectrum, as we call it, CBD. So when they extract it from the plant, that everything else that is in the plant is still in it. Long story short, Dr. Dennis reported that I had one of the best recovery. No, I had the best recovery he had ever seen in terms of the reduction in inflammation and just the whole recovery process, which was due to I was using this CBD. The point of that story is that here I am, a cannabis, at that point, I could just say connoisseur with 15 years of cannabis experience at that time, who had no source of information or nowhere to turn for guidance on how to use this plant. And that was kind of my light bulb moment, like, whoa, even somebody like myself who's been a cultivator, been a caregiver, been in this space for 15 years, I can't figure this out. Clearly, the average layperson is not going to be able to figure this out. So I knew that there was this tremendous gap in education and a need for education in the cannabis space. But that's 2016. I had a lot going on in life, just got married. My brother and I just started a new business with the restaurants at the airport. So that ended up taking me back home. Fast forward in time, the pandemic hits. Our restaurants are just buried through no traffic at the airport. And so I just had that moment where I had to sit back and really evaluate my life and say, what am I going to do? You know, and one thing I learned about, the most important thing I learned from grad school is that happiness and balance in life comes from the work that we do. We spend our whole lifespan working if you're not a trust fund baby, right? Work over the course of your lifespan, we spend the majority of our time working. So if you don't find purpose and enjoyment in what you do for a living, you're going to be miserable. So I just sat back and I said, well, you know what? Fuck this, man. I'm not going to spend 8 hours of my day doing something that I don't love. And luckily at the time, I could financially support myself through this whole figuring out process. But I came up with Cannabis Media Collective, and Cannabis Media Collective is a collective of educated people who are all about elevating cannabis wellness. So when you go to my platform, you're going to see content with doctors, practitioners. Basically, you have to have a master's level education or above to release and share content on my platform.
Okay, so
it's like it's a scholarly resource,
and it's a clearinghouse for both is podcast, it's video and audio. Is it research papers? Is it information?
Absolutely. Yep. We have a database.
All of that.
My partner Justin and I are actually putting together a database now.
Yeah.
Of research papers, scholarly articles, peer-reviewed content where people can go and learn and share. So basically it's a scholarly source of information for cannabis wellness. Because up until now, it's a lot of, your neighborhood head shop or your
made accessible for people, for lay people,
for the everyday person, right? For that parent who has a child with autism and they're hearing about cannabis and they want to know more. And where do they go?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully I'll have an interview with Dr. Bonnie soon, but they can go to CMC and watch an interview with Dr. Hodge, watch an interview with legitimate people who have spent their life focusing on their education. So, and no offense to our neighborhood connoisseurs and, industry influencers and people who've been in this space 20 something years
Sure.
and
Right.
have a tremendous amount of information. We love them too.
Well,
However,
I mean, yeah, but there is a value. Look, I'm all for, people, but both the value of knowledge based entirely on experience, the value of knowledge that grows out of intuition, and frequently, anecdotes and intuitions are sometimes wrong, and the way to
absolutely,
find that out is through careful, measured, scientific
absolutely.
exploration. So
And so
it's a
I
value.
founded CMC with the knowledge that when I was a master's graduate student, there was no place I could go to find information,
Mhm.
right? There was no place I could go to share information. And so my platform is really
Mhm.
just a a collective of educated, scholarly, like-minded cannabis wellness people who want to share their skill set and their
Yeah,
knowledge. What we actually do is, in addition to providing those resources, we'll just call them resources, where it's
yeah,
videos, papers, a database. We also provide education and counseling services. So I haven't coined the term, but I'm one of the leaders, the thought leaders in this space of the cannabis counseling conversation, right? In mental health, you go to your average therapist, even today, and you talk about cannabis, 9 times out of 10, they're going to jump down your throat about, are you smoking too much?
right,
Is it negatively affecting you?
right.
Is it fucking up your life? When there's a whole
Well, I
different
mean, those,
paradigm shift that
yeah,
needs to be taking place to understand that cannabis is a
right.
tool for healing and
Well,
relief.
and those all may be good questions and all possible, but if an uninformed person is asking them without without a knowledge base, how will you
Exactly.
know when somebody says, "Yeah, this is what I'm doing"? It's like, well, that may be too much. It may not, right? I mean, it's a
Exactly.
whole different attitude. So,
Exactly. So
yeah,
clients can go to my platform. They can book an appointment. Well, first, it all starts with a free consultation where we
yeah,
talk and just address what your issues are and what your concerns are, what your interests are. You might even have any issues. You might just have interest. Um, and I split my services up into two different lanes. It's a cannabis education lane where we can book an hour session and I can just educate you on a particular topic that you're interested in regarding cannabis. Or we can have a cannabis counseling session where it's your typical psychotherapy session, but it's from a cannabis framework where I understand that cannabis is a tool for healing and relief.
mhm,
And I help people understand how to use it more effectively to get the outcome that they want, whatever that might be. That might be better sleep. That might be less anxiety. It might be less pain. That might be more interpersonal skills or intrapersonal skills. It might be an introspective discovery they're trying to go on,
yeah.
whatever that might be.
I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but and we can edit all this out or whatever. But um, how do you run into Michael Lawson, living in the state of Georgia, run into issues like somebody's in a state where it's not legal, and they come to you and they're getting information about the use of cannabis and maybe the flower, and
Mhm.
but and your is there a navigation that you have to do through? Is that
Oh,
treacherous
absolutely.
waters? Yeah,
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, let's
yeah,
face it. In Georgia, we have a medical cannabis bill, but it's very limited and it's still on the whole point 0.3 THC or less.
yeah,
Um, And so the culture, well, I'll speak for Georgia. The culture here is very interesting, right? We're in Georgia, but we're in Atlanta. And Atlanta is its own little state of its
yeah,
own,
yeah,
right? So Atlanta, like many municipalities around the state, have decriminalized the possession of cannabis. So you can have it to an ounce on your person. Law enforcement's not going to give you a hard time,
you get
right?
a fine. You get a fine.
At the officer's discretion.
Got it.
But this is in the city of Atlanta. However, if you get pulled over by a Georgia state patrol officer, they don't have to abide by the
Yeah.
city
Of course, because the
ordinance.
world is irrational.
This is America.
Yeah,
So if
everything's
Joe
different.
Joe Blow's state trooper pulls you over and you got an ounce on you, more than likely you're going to go to jail,
Yeah,
right? But then it's also very murky because we live in the South where everyone has guns. They just allowed
yeah,
concealed carry with no permits. So, yeah, you can be a law-abiding citizen with a pistol and 7 grams of cannabis. Now you're a felon.
Now you're a felon. Yeah.
But the culture in Atlanta is, Atlanta is a black city predominantly. The police force is predominantly black. And conversations I've had with friends of mine that are connected to the brass who really make all the decisions, they pretty much sat in a room and decided they're not pursuing cannabis offenses anymore, big
Mm-hmm.
or small. You can
Mm-hmm.
go through the Atlanta Journal Constitution, one of the major newspapers down here, and you will not find a major weed drug bust in there. You'd be
Mm-hmm.
hard pressed to find one
Yeah.
because they're just not pursuing it, right? But like, as the saying goes, when you leave Atlanta, you're in Georgia.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah. I
drive
get
up
it.
75 north and you get to Cobb County, you will go to jail over a gram of weed, more than
Right.
likely.
Right.
Gwinnett County, Douglas County, all the various counties surrounding Atlanta. So I'll say all that to say, yes, it's a very gray area to navigate. Um, but people need their medicine, and I'm a firm believer in that. So whether
Well, and you don't just have to have clients because it's digital, right? I mean, you don't
right,
just have to have clients from Georgia, right?
no, I don't, I
Yeah.
don't. But I'm gonna be frank. At the end of the day, there are networks of people who provide these products
Sure.
everywhere you go, and so for my clients that are here in Atlanta, I'm able to reach out and touch them and get in touch with them physically and get them products that they need. Um, but it's very tricky, you know.
Sure.
It's very tricky, but at the end of the day, it's worth it.
Yeah.
I always say, I just like to serve the people. When I look at my client list right now, man, my clients are all about your age. Most of them are dealing with cancer. I got prostate cancer,
Mm.
breast cancer, cervical cancer, a lot of MS, right? People that are, I'm not just dealing with your everyday stoner that's just trying to figure their life out.
All right. Because they don't
No,
need that
I'm dealing with
information.
people that have some significant medical
Yeah.
challenges and they
Yeah.
find tremendous relief from
And
this.
how do they find you? Is that sort of underground or not underground, but quiet network? Oh,
Absolutely.
you
It's a
need to
quiet
speak to.
network.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest, my clients that I have right now, with the exception of maybe two of my new clients that I got through social media. But my clients that I have are just through word of mouth and friends and family.
Yeah. Got it.
I have a friend whose
Sure.
uncle has prostate cancer
Yeah.
and heard that cannabis can help with sleep and pain. They want to know
Yeah.
more, right? I have a friend, their mother's aunt just
Sure.
had surgery and her back is killing her, and she doesn't
Sure.
want to take Percocet and oxycodone and
Yeah.
have
You
freaking
bet.
hip problems and get addicted and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so one thing I realize is that people will make a significant effort to find ways to heal themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Period.
I want to shift. It's not really even shifting. It's fascinating, by the way. So thank you. But
No, thank you.
um, you know, this may sound like a naive question, and it probably is. But you know me, so it probably isn't. So way back when 1939, when was it 39?
Mhm.
When no later than that, when the boys wanted to make it illegal all over the country.
Mhm.
What
That was 19 that was in the late that was early 30s, yeah.
early 30s.
Mhm.
Okay, so why was THC, marijuana, why was that more a function of black and brown community, more present in black and brown communities than elsewhere? Like,
My personal take on that is that cannabis is more accessible to the common person, right? Especially when you're talking about the
more
strains of,
accessible than alcohol? More accessible than
I would say yes, because when you look at, let's talk about alcohol, right? To really to manufacture alcohol, you need a still, you need a
yeah.
distillery. I would just argue that it's easier to drop some seeds in your backyard, water it, let the sun hit it, and see what
Well, it is
happens
way easier.
versus
Yeah.
building your own distillery and going through that whole process, right? And so when you just talk about fundamentally how do you get from the process of getting from seed to sale, as they call it, from seed to product versus alcohol,
Yeah.
is a harder process. And then also when we talk about alcohol, I mention it all the time, man. People leave out of the conversation that alcohol is one of the few substances
Totally.
that you can die from withdrawal
Yeah. Totally.
on top
It's
of
yeah.
overconsumption,
Yeah. It was yeah. Exactly.
right? But alcohol will kill you if you use too much of it, and then if you stop using it too fast.
Yeah.
How crazy is that, right?
Yeah.
And so, number one, I think cannabis, especially when you start moving towards the West Coast where the weather is more favorable, it was easier to produce it and manufacture it at a large scale.
Yeah. Why did it end up more common in the communities of color,
Oh, let me back
the
up. Let me
white
correct
community?
you. Let me correct you. I don't think it was more common in communities of color.
Oh, I
We're
thought
all
that's what you
using
had
it.
said before. I thought that's what you had said before
Oh
was
no, the distribution and sale. Black
uh
and brown control the economics of the cannabis industry. Let me,
and do you have any insight into why that was true?
you know what? I don't have any insight. I have a hypothesis,
Yeah.
you know. And let me circle back to just clear that up for the listeners. And we know this through the data now that cannabis is used the same across the board among
Yeah.
all cultures, peoples, and backgrounds. We're all
Okay.
using it.
I
White,
misunderstood
brown,
what you were
black.
saying before. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, no, I
everybody's
know in
using this
terms of
plant.
what it using now. I'm talking about back then when you talked about it.
Right. So my hypothesis to that, if I'm being honest, David,
Yeah.
is I think the slave trade had a huge impact on that. I think that black and brown people came out of centuries of agricultural experience, and that's putting it very politely. When slavery ended at the end of the 18th century, there was a diaspora of millions of black and brown people leaving the South who had been toiling and tilling and being brutalized in farms for centuries. So we left with literally centuries of knowledge.
With a lot of botanical information.
Hello.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. That's a
Okay.
good hypothesis. That's an interesting hypothesis.
And so it's no
Yeah.
coincidence
Yeah.
that as black people left Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Maryland, Virginia, and went to Chicago, New
Yeah.
York,
Yeah.
West Coast. And this plant is growing everywhere. It's not hard to cultivate it, and everybody uses it. It's common sense. So to think that
Yeah.
Harry Anslinger and the gang didn't know that what we see happening here in the cannabis industry today, I believe they foresaw that happening then. That this is a multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar industry. Black and brown people stood to gain tremendously from having a stranglehold on the whole industry itself.
That's interesting.
And so it's no coincidence that in 1939, the LaGuardia Commission, they're telling us black and brown people control this. It's their industry. It's theirs. It's theirs.
That would an aside, that would be a really interesting paper. Somebody ought to write that paper. Somebody who knows about it ought to write that paper.
100%. And that
So,
this is what I focused on my substance abuse paper for my master's was legalization of cannabis, which I wrote in 2011.
Yeah, it's a
year
good
before legalization. And so there's no coincidence, man, that we control the industry, they prohibit the industry, and then fast forward now, black and brown people represent less than 5% of ownership equity in this
cultivators.
space
Yeah.
on any
Dispensaries,
sector, whether it's
any of it.
cultivation, manufacturing,
Yeah.
retail,
Yeah.
medicine, you name it.
Yeah.
And so this industry was taken from us,
Yeah. I get it.
in my humble opinion. And so when you hear people get frustrated about social equity, you got a lot of these investors and companies are like, man, why did people get to skip the line and this whole social equity conversation, and people get, black and brown people and people with arrest records get licenses first, and how is that? Dude, we're owed so much more than that, because on top of the fact that this industry was taken from us, we also know that we are the ones who have carried the load of prohibition for the past century. We the ones that are going to jail for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's
right?
true.
I'll never forget, man, one of my clients, it was like a beyond a watershed moment for me, but one of my clients, I visited him in jail in DeKalb County, and he said to me, Mr. Lawson, where's the jail for the white kids? And he was dead serious, like genuinely, because he knows there are white people in this world.
And he knows they're getting high.
And he knows they're getting high.
Yeah.
And tearing shit up.
Yeah.
But they're not in jail with him.
Yeah.
He was genuinely curious about that. And that shit blew my fucking mind. I'll never forget it. And so fast forward in time, that's my take on it. It's a little unorthodox, but I think historically, I think that's what happened.
That's an interesting paper to write.
Absolutely. You know what? You just really put a battery in my back to really revisit this, because at the end of the day, I have a personal attachment to it, because my parents are from the South. My mother is from a little town called Olena, South Carolina, where my grandmother's house still sits on a dirt road. Your street is your last name. You know what I'm saying? Rural South Carolina, which South Carolina is where the slaves first touched down in the slave trade in America. Okay. My father's from Arkansas, so he's a little further inland. But, I still remember, God bless her, going to my grandmother's house, going out to the chicken coop, getting eggs for breakfast. Like, I had that experience.
Yeah.
And I feel just spiritually connected to that past. And so we can't overlook the fact that this industry, we were robbed of our position in this industry. We were criminalized for it. And now fast forward a century later, we're very little represented in this industry. Yeah. And so that's another thing that Cannabis Media Collective aims to do, is empower entrepreneurs, right? Give them more information that can further their business, particularly Black and brown businesses.
On a side, is Michael Lawson taking steps to be in that business? Not 100%. Where you are. Good.
100%. I'm an entrepreneur. I've just always just had an entrepreneur mind state ever since. I always tell the story, man. When I was at Pilgrim School, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, I'm at the student store buying a burrito for $1. And I'm looking in this freezer, and it's like 600 burritos in there. And I'm like, wow, that's like $600 worth of burritos. But it only costs like $50 to buy them in bulk. Where's the money going? So, I'm a kid asking myself these questions. Like, that's not normal, but that's just what I've always been that way. So absolutely, I have visions of, my vision for. I'll get into that real quick before we wrap. My vision.
Well, wait, I got a couple of questions for you, but
no, absolutely. And
I know I'm taking too much time.
I want to make sure I answer them, but
but I'm making too much time. Taking too much.
My vision of Cannabis Media Collective is to, not vision, my plan. The first phase is the digital piece, where people can go to the platform and
which is great,
receive resources and education and information. The secondly, we're going to be purchasing commercial real estate, and we're going to get an office building, and it's going to be the CMC compound. And what we're going to do is provide office space for what we call people in the ancillary space in cannabis, people who are in the cannabis business, but they don't touch the plant, right? So your accountants, your marketing people, your lawyers, your cultivating designers, your architects, your cannabis industry influencers, people who need office space to work and create. Because reality is now, if I go down the street and say, hey, can I lease this $2,500 square foot office space for Cannabis Media Collective? I'm a cannabis educator. I do all this, that, and the other in the
You
cannabis
ain't getting
industry.
that. No.
That's a negative,
Yeah.
right? So there's a tremendous need for legit office space for cannabis ancillary businesses. And not a lot of people are talking about that because the
Hmm.
first people to win in the cannabis industry are the people who own the real estate. No matter what you do, if you have a small craft grow that's 2,000 square feet, or you have a 10,000 square foot warehouse that you're growing bud out of, you either own or you lease that building. If you lease that building, then you're paying the owner of that building a hefty sum,
But this
right?
is not happening in the state of Georgia.
Cultivation, well, that's another conversation. They've moved the needle forward on that, so there is cultivation here happening in Georgia, but it's all CBD, low dose THC stuff. Is not.
And that's legal currently?
Yes, but it's very muddy though.
That's a wacky state you live in.
They've only given out two licenses.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
process was,
Yeah.
filled with corruption and trickiness.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're revisiting the whole license issuance process, so on and so forth. So yeah, that's phase two of CMC is the brick and mortar um,
Yeah.
approach, and then I want cannabis culture is different everywhere we go. One thing I realized about just traveling the world is like the United States is a very unique place. You know, culture and outside of cannabis, just culture period is different in Florida than it is in Georgia, than
That's
it is in
true.
Texas, than it
Yeah.
is in Arizona, than it is in California, than it is in Wyoming, than it
Yeah.
is in Seattle, than it is in Chicago. It's different. So 20 years from now, I would imagine the CMC being in every major city and even smaller cities,
Cool.
right? And that's how I want to empower the next generation of cannabis creators who are smarter than us and who have ideas and innovation for the future. Where do they go to set up shop and to really
Hmm.
create and to do their
Hmm.
work, right? But then also, I've always been interested in restaurants. My one of my favorite people in the world, the late great Adolph Doolin, king of LA soul food. When I was a kid, he used to always tell me, man, people will always need somewhere to live, and they always want to go somewhere outside their home to eat. And now I've added a third thing: people will always be smoking weed or consuming cannabis in some form or fashion. It's been going on since
Yeah.
the dawn of time. Since day zero, as one of my one of my students just said, since year zero, cannabis has been here, right? So
Yeah.
my other entrepreneurship ventures, I'm going to be rolling out soon, or going to be opening up a coffee shop here in Atlanta.
Good.
Um, Being that I mentioned to you just the culture with Atlanta and where legalization and decriminalization is going, I want to have consumption on the premises. I want it to be a regular coffee shop cafe, but I want to have a room upstairs, ideally upstairs, so the smoke can rise and leave.
And
But
will this be, do you have a lot of negotiation and to make that happen, or
no, I'm just gonna force the issue. That's how my partner and I are looking at it. We're opening up a coffee house slash cafe, and we're just gonna have a room set to the side to allow people to consume. Simple as that.
Hmm.
And we think that we're certain that law enforcement will allow it because cannabis is already consumed in restaurants and establishments around town. It's more like in a club scene type of vibe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But these club owners have basically opened up a lounge that
Right.
serves food
Yeah.
and has
Yeah.
hookah, and then
Yeah.
they just let people smoke weed there. But I want to change the narrative and say no,
Yeah.
this is a high end, you know, $5-6 cup of coffee type of establishment, um, but a place for our educated blue and white collar people to enjoy their cannabis. So that's on the horizon for me.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, it's just a journey. When the pandemic hit and pretty much just wiped out my business that was taking care of my family, I just made my mind up that I was going to spend the rest of my life doing something that I love.
Mhm.
Not that I didn't love the restaurant industry, but to just see millions of dollars and my livelihood just taken from me in a matter of days. March 7th, 2020 was doomsday for the airport people. And to watch that happen, it was mind blowing. And so I'm just focusing the rest of my years on this planet, man, to I just want people to be happy and healthy.
Cool. Well,
And people,
okay. Can we, because I know I'm already eating up your time and I apologize. I
no,
really,
it's all good. I love
but
it.
this is fascinating, man.
And just to be transparent, I have a counseling session with a client at noon, so we have time. I'm not.
Okay.
I don't need to
Okay.
get off like right now.
So I want to move and I'll cut it, whatever, but I want to move to the conversation. Um, we know, no, I don't want to frame it like that. Um, okay. So, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, Wall Street Journal publishes an article about the dangers of cannabis for older people who are
Oh
using,
God, yeah, we're talking about that.
right?
Yeah,
So and okay, so there's that. There's the information. Maybe it's misinformation. Maybe it's real information. Maybe it's about
there's
people
some truth to
smoking
that.
too
Yeah.
much. But are there any dangers?
Right.
And um and how do you deal with the issue of youth?
That's an excellent question. And I'll be the first to say, absolutely, there are risks, right? I tell people all the time in the mental health space when I sit on these panels at different conferences and talk about cannabis and mental health, people who are predisposed to mental health disorders or psychotic disorders are at risk to using cannabis, right? They should not be using cannabis. Somebody who's diagnosed with schizophrenia or like severe bipolar,
Yeah.
uh, I don't want to just throw everybody that has severe bipolar under the mat and say they can't use cannabis, but people with significant psychological challenges, cannabis may exacerbate those things, right? That's just a fact. So, and like I mentioned earlier in the interview, my philosophy is cannabis is not for everyone,
Mhm.
but it's an option,
Mhm.
right? And more importantly, when we talk about cannabis and people with significant mental health challenges or disorders, most of that conversation revolves around THC,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So there, it's not that that individual can't use the plant at all, right? Because we know that terpenes have an impact on us. Just the smell of a particular terpene can uplift you, right? Can have a mood adjustment type of quality to it, right? But yes, there are inherent risks to using cannabis if you're predisposed to different things. Also, particularly to the flower, right? You know, you have companies out here who are using pesticides and using chemicals and using
Mm.
different solvents and different things that are foreign to the plant in
Mhm.
the whole production process. So if you're not familiar with the source of your flower or your products and they're not being laboratory tested for microbials, for pesticides, for fungus, for viruses, for chemical solvents, then there's a risk, right? And then you have a ton of companies that are cutting corners, and at the end of the day, they're looking at a P&L, and they're going to do what they can to bolster that P&L. So there are definitely risks, 100%. Now, you talked about the elderly. I didn't read the whole article the Wall Street Journal did, but there's a bunch of different publications that released this whole like, ooh, it's dangerous. Oh, blood pressure, your heart, and all the cardiac arrest.
It was blood pressure, it was falls, it was memory, and it was disturbing sleep. Now, some of it may be what you said before is that people don't know because the information is not
Absolutely.
there. People don't know how it could be used more effectively. But,
Correct.
but it, yeah. So good.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I will speak to that. And we can't just throw all of those claims under the rug and say, oh, they're not true, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it is true, right? If my grandmother has a 250 milligram edible and she's just blasted out of her mind, yeah, there's a risk she might slip and fall,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
common sense, but guess what? There's a risk that I might slip and fall
Sure.
using that dose of cannabis. So,
Yeah.
um, there are risks, and that's where people need to get educated,
Right.
right?
You
And
bet.
circling back to the point I made earlier, that we now know that THC used in there's like this sweet spot in term. Everyone has a sweet spot in terms of
Mhm.
what is effective for them, right? And when we go beyond that, that's when we see negative outcomes, the paranoia,
Mhm.
disruption in motor skills. You're slipping and falling.
Yeah.
Um, and so,
And and the
contrarily,
sleep disturbances, right? I mean,
sleep disturbances,
yeah, you smoke too much and God knows what. And
sleep disturbances, right? And so, but contrarily, when we use less THC, that's when we see these positive effects where you're
mhm,
getting the great sleep,
mhm,
you're getting the pain reduction,
yeah,
getting reducing the inflammation. And so, this, as the saying goes in this space, is know your dose. What your dose is may not be what your neighbor's dose is.
right.
And so you have to experiment and play with that. But to just think, for any publication to just come out and say like this is dangerous for the
Well, it's
geriatric
clearly,
community,
I mean, it was clearly,
it's
there
too
was
much.
clearly an attitude in the article, but it just so happened. It just dawned on me. I know I asked that question about youth, but it also just dawned on me. Do you have do you and are there connections between the what's going on in the cannabis space and what's going on in the other psychotropics, right? I mean, in the last several years there's all sorts
Mm-hmm.
of psilocybin's been research studies and yada
Mm-hmm.
yada yada. What's the organization in Santa Cruz? Maps that they've been looking at MDMA and
Yeah,
hallucinogens
for
for years.
sure.
Is there
Ketamine.
is there are there intentional sort of connections between like your organization and other organizations working in different?
Absolutely.
And there are, yeah,
Collaboration, working in concert. Absolutely.
yeah.
Because I think where you're headed with this is
No, just was curious.
what we're seeing now. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah,
What we're seeing now in mainstream media and science, or I would say mainstream science, but what is starting to emerge is this movement of plant-based medicine.
absolutely, without a
Okay.
doubt. Yeah,
People finding relief through plant-based therapeutics, whether
yeah,
that's psilocybin, all of these various
yeah,
different
yeah,
substances that are psychotropic, right? But the reality is, once again, knowing your dose.
yeah, absolutely.
The data is in, and we've known this about psilocybin, but the government just shut that down. That micro dosing the mushroom is tremendously beneficial for a lot of people
Hmm.
on a mental health level.
Hmm.
I can't speak more to the physiological benefits of it. I'd have to talk to Dr. Hodge. He's an expert in mushrooms. Um, but absolutely, there's collaboration and
Got it.
conversation amongst the
Yeah.
communities, because as cannabis has now moved into the mainstream, and now Nana can use it and your granddad can use it, and they're having an edible and they're being goofy and they're going to sleep and not having any pain. They're like, man, this is great. As cannabis becomes more accepted, so will psilocybin and these other substances. And
Hmm.
I'm a firm believer that when you know yourself, you know how your body reacts to these substances, and you use them at the right dose, they can be very effective.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, people want and need relief. That's what it's all about.
Mm.
And so now we're gonna circle to the youth, right?
Yeah, tell me, so
So
talk to me about that. Well, like, so
yeah,
what
so
about youth?
yeah, so there's this whole conversation where we could talk about the autism piece, right? And I've been talking about this for years, just cannabis in pediatric medicine, right? Because cannabis is, as it always is across the board, is found to be super effective with children that have epilepsy, and various different types of seizure disorders. Now we're seeing autism, and I didn't get into the specifics, but Dr. Bonnie, not only did she discover that these children have an endocannabinoid deficiency, most of them have issues in their gut, they have anandamide deficiencies. Um, when they give them this ratio, this formulation, I believe is a 20-to-1 ratio, 20 being CBD, 1 being THC. So it's a 20-to-1 ratio. Parents are seeing dramatic effects with
Mm.
behaviors improving, communication improving,
Mm.
right? So it's kind of a question of like the cost benefit, right? If you're giving your child a tincture, which is just like a drop, a lot of these parents are dropping the tincture into some food or into something, which is not the most effective delivery system.
Right.
The tablet is the most effective delivery system. So not to make a buck, but to change the world. Me and your other matter of fact, we're gonna have to do another session because Ashley and I, Ashley formerly Wiley,
Ashley Wiley, what's her
Dr.
name now?
Dr. Ashley Wiley Johnson,
Yeah.
president of LA Speech and Language Therapy Center.
Yeah.
We are going to be doing some research on this and develop our own formulation for young people and parents with autism, because
That's great.
at the end of the day, parents want results. Parents want to be able to communicate with their children, and parents want a better quality life. When your kid is bouncing off the walls, tearing shit up, can't communicate, but then you give them this ratio and all of a sudden they've calmed down, you can talk to them, you can interact with them. That's life changing for people.
You bet.
Right. And so I'm a firm believer that when parents have other options to give their parents these cannabis medicines where they don't smell like weed, there's no stigma around it, they don't have to smoke weed. I mean, some parents have gone so far as to like have their children inhale cannabis to get these effects. Right. So the bottom line is the future of pediatric medicine is a lot of innovation there, because there are tremendous gains to be made when using this plant in the right way.
But I guess I want to say out loud, it's a question. You're not advocating, the CMC is not advocating sort of, the unlimited availability of pot for the nation's youth.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And then, coming from my background, man, I smoked I could count the times I smoked weed on two hands, like in high school. And honestly, it was really probably like 6 or 7 times.
I don't think there were enough hands available at the school,
right?
Count the number of times that our friends who shall be nameless.
But hanging out with these folks, man, you would, because I was an athlete year round, so I didn't smoke like that. Like literally, I might have smoked 6 or 7 times in high school.
Yeah,
at best. So no, I'm not a proponent of all adolescents smoking cannabis.
Yeah.
No, I am a proponent of all human beings, period, using cannabis in a way that can benefit them. So if that means they take Dr. Hodges' daytime focus tablet in the morning, and that makes them more balanced and focused in school, then yeah, why not?
Can I clarify something we didn't at the beginning? Was so cannabis is not simply THC, right? Pot,
No.
Cannabis refers to a plant that has a range of cannabinoids.
Well, correct. And they're two different things, right? They're two different conversations. You have two different paradigms. Some people separate the two and say you have the cannabis plant that has THC and has all these cannabinoids. And then they say there's a hemp plant that has very little THC, but also has many cannabinoids. That's one train of thought. A second train of thought, people in my corner, we all just kind of put it in the same group. The cannabis plant is a cannabis plant, whether it's low THC. But
when you say something like, when somebody in the field advocates for the use of cannabis, they may be referring to the plant, they may be referring to the flower, they may be referring to those pills that are,
absolutely. Whatever. So you would have to ask, you have to take a deeper dive on that.
Yeah,
right.
Got
because
it.
I'm a firm believer. Like, this says hemp extract on here.
Yeah,
probably because we're in Georgia and he doesn't want to go to jail and
be in trouble. Absolutely.
But this is cannabis.
Yeah, I get it.
At the end of the day, it's or the more politically correct way is cannabis derived.
Got it.
Right.
Got it.
Because the scientists who are really doing the grunt work in the labs, they're discovering more shit every day.
Well, so wait, cannabis derived. Are there cannabinoids are there lab created cannabinoids?
Oh, David, yeah, we're gonna have to circle back.
Cool. We'll do part 2.
We'll do part 2 because that's a whole nother conversation where the science is moving towards synthetic cannabinoids, where they're
like anything else.
The cannabinoids.
If they're making lab grown meat,
they got everything. They got lab grown meat, lab grown diamonds. They got lab grown everything, right? And so, but I'm also a firm believer in keeping the plant in its natural state. But we can't have that conversation without saying like, okay, well, if we can mass produce this
Sure.
cannabinoid that can benefit people, why wouldn't we do it? Right.
Right.
So I'm not against synthesizing
No,
cannabinoids, but
I get it.
I'm a firm believer that if you can grow your medicine in your closet, do it. And it's no
Yeah.
coincidence, man, that our elders, yours included, they didn't have all these fucking problems, man, with cancer and
Yeah.
you name all the shit that the common man is dealing with in this generation. Our grandparents didn't have those problems, man. But why? Because primarily they were eating foods that came straight out of the ground.
Yeah. Well, they had problems that they didn't necessarily come from their food. Right. I mean,
I didn't say they didn't have problems, right?
no, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But a lot
Yeah.
of their problems were not coming
Yeah. They
from what
weren't.
they
Right.
consumed.
That's right.
You know, and so yes, the synthesis or I don't know again
Synthesis. Just
the
synthesis.
synthesis, yes, the synthesis of the cannabinoids is a whole nother debate and conversation. I think on
Yeah.
one hand it's necessary. On another hand, I'm a firm believer in all natural way.
Sure.
You know?
Sure. Well, Michael, this has been fascinating.
Oh yeah, man. We gotta circle back. Like
so
let's put some on the calendar for next week or something.
We will.
Sure.
All right. And we'll do
seriously,
this. We
let's
will.
get on the
We'll do
calendar
more.
for part 2.
I promise you. I promise you.
Most
Dude,
definitely.
it's great.
You have a great day.
Love
Great
you, man.
Your morning. It's still early morning over there, man. So I appreciate you.
Yeah. Say hi to your mom and dad.
Man,
Hi,
until
dude.
next time, David. Thank
All
you
right,
so
man.
much.
I love you. You take
Love
care
you
of
too,
yourself.
man.
Yeah.
Let's
Bye.
do it. Peace.